Hi everyone, I'm John McCullagh from PositiveLight.com, and we're here today at the 9th Annual Gay Men's Sexual Health Alliance Summit in downtown Toronto. And I'm joined today by Rahim Thawer, who is a social worker and a counsellor who works with gay men. Hi Rahim.
Hi, thanks for having me, John.
You're welcome. You were on a panel this morning, the subject of which was what are we really talking about when it comes to barebacking. And in your work, you will have talked to a lot of men about their sex lives. Yeah. So perhaps I could start by asking you, who is it who is barebacking?
Who is barebacking? Well, this is a good question that I tried to tackle in my presentation today. I think the term barebacking has been used in a way that has a negative connotation in many ways. So it's difficult to answer, because if I say it's negative guys or positive guys or younger guys or older guys, I'd be concerned that I'm saying a particular group of people are doing a very bad thing. So in terms of who's having condomless sex, I would say probably people in all kinds of groups of gay men. And what I'm interested in is how we've conceptualized the idea of barebacking and high risk taking in the gay community in ways that might be more divisive than helpful for a variety of reasons.
Right. So it could really be anybody and everybody who potentially is having bareback sex.
Right.
And we know that bareback sex or sex without condoms, anal sex without condoms, has been very much demonized in our community over the years, and therefore has become pathologized, and it's seen as something inherently wrong. And I'd like to understand from you a little bit about that, but also about why you think guys are choosing, from time to time, perhaps not always, to have anal sex without using a condom.
Mm-hmm. I think the idea of demonizing condomless sex or barebacking, I think it has a lot of roots in how, as a community, maybe we've survived or triumphed through kind of the gay epidemic. And though demonizing is a bad thing, I think for many people it comes from a place of wanting to have a community that is kind of on the same page about sexual health, where there's mutual care and trust for one another. I don't think it comes necessarily from a bad place. But I also think that as gay men, we've often had to defend ourselves in the public eye and had to face all kinds of other discrimination. So when it comes to HIV, I think part of what's on our mind is also thinking about are we giving the right image to other gay men and people out there outside the gay community about who we are and I feel like we've almost inherited a sense of needing to defend our moral ground for the decisions we make, if that makes sense.
Yes, and I think sometimes we often talk about people choosing to have what might be described as risky sex because they have some issues around some social determinants of health, such as like they're depressed or they drink too much. And I'm wondering whether you think that we put too much emphasis on the social determinants of health, or do you think they have a place?
I think overemphasizing things like depression and anxiety and substance use is not always helpful. But I also think that many of us in the gay community, for issues that are larger than any one individual person, do leave us in a place with social determinants of health that impact us in various ways. And so we're left feeling not so great sometimes about the decisions we make about sex, relationships, our partners, that kind of thing. So while I think we need to not demonize unprotected sex, or condomless sex rather, as much as maybe we have, I also think that the social determinants of health perspective is still important, because we don't want to assume that people aren't having conflicting feelings about navigating the gay world or navigating the world that they live in. Because I think it's complex. I think we have ideas and beliefs about risk, and then we have our actual behavior. And I think the conflict or the tension that arises from those two things that's the part of human experience that, as a gay community or from an HIV perspective, we probably need to talk more about.
Right. Now, of course, HIV is very different today than it was perhaps even 10 years ago, when we have medications that are much less toxic and more manageable with fewer side effects. And I'm wondering, Rahim, whether you think that some guys are actually making a rational decision to dispense with condoms, in the sense that they would say that it's worth having really hot sex in the here and now against some future possibility of having to take medication for an eminently treatable disease.
Right. That's a good question, John. So I think that often we compartmentalize different aspects of our sexualities, and so we have a way of thinking about risk that's kind of in one side of our mind, and then the behavior and how we relate to people occurs in a different part of our mind. Now, I'm not saying mechanically, biologically, they're different parts of our mind, but that's how we kind of compartmentalize. And so I think for some people, and when they think about risk in one layer of their thinking, they might be thinking about HIV as a chronic illness, taking a pill a day, and that line of thinking. But my sense is that people do still experience a lot of conflict between the sex they want, the sex they have, the choices they make, the idealized version of relationships that they have in their mind. And so I think that's the area that still needs to get talked about, whether it's in counseling or case management or in leadership programs or, at the bar over a cocktail, whatever it is. I think we still need to talk about the things that affect us and shape the way we feel about our bodies and our sex lives. And I don't think that as good as treatment is getting, that a pill a day is going to take away from years and years of socialization and marginalization and the things that have brought us to this crossroad where HIV has allowed us to talk about a lot of these other issues that are affecting gay men.
Right. I'd like to ask you now about pos guys who are having condomless sex, because we often frame the discussion in terms of the risks for negative guys, but are there risks for positive guys, or should we be having a different language when we speak about this?
Yeah, I think the idea of risk and HIV prevention have gone hand in hand. And so for a long time, we've just been responding to a crisis or an epidemic, and largely we were talking about HIV prevention. And so for guys who are HIV positive, the next big concern might be, not for everyone, but might be syphilis and perhaps Hep C co-infection. Those are really big issues. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's other STIs as well. So it's important to reframe probably at this point what risk means to different communities, and maybe to even question the language around risk, right? To something more about how comfortable are we with the decisions we're making, and acknowledging that there's going to be people in both HIV positive and HIV negative communities who both want to have condomless sex and, choose not to have condomless sex. And then there'll be the many of us in either community who are in the middle of those Venn diagrams who, fantasize about condomless sex, but there's a tension there in carrying it out.
Right. So, this discussion we're having really changes the discourse from what we've been used to, which is use a condom every time. That's the way to prevent HIV transmission. So I'm just wondering what this discussion about, this open now discussion that's happening about the reality that guys are not always using condoms when they have anal sex, what this means for HIV prevention in 2013.
Right. Well, I think you touched on something very important, that the message up until now or up until recently has been about, condom use, and that being the underlying message in everything. And so while I don't think that's inherently bad, when I think about some counseling theory, reiterating ideas about biological risk on its own might lead people to think about risk and justify behavior in a particular way, and having to be in a position where you're justifying yourself isn't helpful to create change. It's a defensive position to be in. So I think maybe we need to shift the conversation a little bit, and it needs to be less with the center of with the center being on HIV transmission, and more about our comfort level with condomless sex, the type of sex we're having, how we feel when we're having sex. Because, the shift is important so that we're less stigmatizing. Mm-hmm. And we acknowledge that both pause and negative guys want to have both condomless sex and sex with condoms, but also thinking about what are some of the underlying things that gay men are dealing with in terms of just broad level gay men's health. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now.
Right. So, Rahim, you've given us a lot to think about. Clearly, that, as I said earlier, HIV is different now, and we have to have a different kind of conversation amongst ourselves about that and about the risk we have and about the kind of sex we have. And you've given us a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And I thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks
today.
for having me.
You're welcome. And I'm John McCullagh from positivelight.com.